So this leads me to the question on your cell phone information. Could you group it? How much more traffic was there in that time period in comparison to 2 weeks beforehand, when obviously then it could have been dropped in the mailbox easily.
We across the country definitely saw a bump the first few days of early voting, and then the last day of voting.
Okay, all right, interesting. One more question before
you're moving quickly.
I
like that. I like that.
So one of the issues that I very strongly about is ballots being did from people in nursing, people who really wouldn't normally vote, I don't think, and don't really know what's going on. Have you considered using some of the cell phone information around nursing homes to try to gather some of the same type of information?
Yes, we're working with our friends here in Wisconsin to do exactly that. We've looked at that in a few other states and have found some very interesting things. We found some specific issues here in Wisconsin, but we haven't drilled into it in any necessary level of depth. We do believe it is a significant
point. I just wanted to say that in your 5 points that you brought up that we need, and you still have them on the board there. Number 5 is penalties that are feared, and I would love to have penalties that are feared, but I would love to have a district attorney other than, say, John Chisholm in Milwaukee to enforce that, because I can make those penalties as strong as can be. And I've seen that. I think about that over and over again when we pass laws here, because I can pass a law. Is anybody out there going to do anything with it? And is it going to be enforced? That's a huge problem. And then the other thing that I was wanted to say before I ended this, we talked about democracy in the park. And why is that a problem? And I will compare it to another event that they were talking about. They were talking about doing an event in Milwaukee at Miller Park, where they were going to bring in the racing sausages and the like. These become election events, and that's why they're inappropriate. This becomes sort of entertainment. It becomes sort of a festival for voting. And this is not what voting is supposed to be all about. Voting is supposed to be more serious than that. And one of my big issues with voting in the modern day is the level of seriousness is being eroded. And that's a terrible thing to happen to our report. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. With that, Representative Subek, Representative Spreitzer.
I have a couple of questions, but I did want to address Representative Murphy saying that we were saying, or that I was saying, that it was okay to vote using an illegal process as long as the ballot was in fact from a voter. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that in 2020, none of the process that's been described today was actually illegal unless someone was in fact messing with someone's ballot.
I think we should just address the questions.
No, I'm going to address Representative Murphy, and then I'll address the question. You gave him a chance to say something. I'm going to respond, and then I will ask a question. I just want to be clear. Right now, for the April 5th election, if you're listening at home, you can't use a drop box, and no one else can return your ballot for you because a judge said so. Yes. But a judge did not say that ahead of the 2020 election. And so at that time, you may have your own interpretation of the law, but no court had said that was illegal. And it is now, we have a court that has said it is illegal going forward. And I just want to make that clarification.
I guess I think I would disagree with you, as there never was a law on drop boxes, and that was the issue. But
Why don't we refer to
Sure.
the individuals that are here today?
So I wanted to get to number 4 and sort of follow up where some of my colleagues left off with voting in the park and with drop boxes. So on voting in the park, and I don't want to belabor this, but just to further clarify what Representative Zubek was saying, there's sort of 2 different ways that we do earlier absentee voting here in Wisconsin. We do absentee voting where the clerk mails you the ballot, and then you have various ways of returning that ballot. And then we have absentee voting where in person and you have the ballot on the spot, not through the, and then either way, you end up putting it back in the same kind of envelope and turning it back in. But one way that process is in person in front of the clerk staff. The other way that process is happening where the clerk mails you the ballot. And then I think what we're debating here today is the range of appropriate ways that you can return that ballot. But there are different timelines for those processes. I think that's where that September 26th confusion came in. It is true that you cannot go and have a clerk issue you a ballot in person until a couple of weeks before the election. But the timeline in federal elections, like what we were having in 2020, I believe it was 47 days where clerks mail out those absentee ballots, and I'm pretty sure September 26th would be within that time frame. And once you get that ballot in your possession, you are free to go ahead and return it. You don't have to wait until a couple weeks before the election to fill it out and turn it back in. So there's what we typically call early voting, which is the in-person component that's limited to a couple weeks. And then there's absentee voting where you get your ballot in the mail. And I think you're doing what the appropriate ways are to return it, but the timeline for returning it would include September 26th. So just wanted to add that clarity on the time there.
The problem in our view, just to be specific, is the chain of custody. When that is put in it was allegedly supposed to go into a particular cooler or a particular bag or something like that. I had video evidence on my phone that suggests that did that. But
I appreciate
the bigger, broader issue is the chain of custody.
I appreciate that because that leads to my next question, which is I'm still really not understanding why you prefer mailboxes to drop boxes or an in-person event like voting in the park. So I'm just going to use my community of Beloit as an example here because we had, for the 2020 election, we had a drop box, and it was at City Hall. It was a driveway as you go into City Hall. There's a roundabout there, and so people can easily go in. It's a metal box. It's been there for years for people to pay their utility bills, their property taxes, things like that, and not used also as a drop box. And the clerk treasurer, whose staff both take the utility bills and also run our elections, are the people who have access to what goes into that drop box. So, if I'm a voter in Beloit, I basically, when I get my ballot in the mail, I have 3 options for returning it. I can either go to City Hall and I can walk up to the second floor and I can go into the clerk's office and hand it in, or I can drive in and I can put it in that drop box, not for this election, but 2020 I could, and know that the clerk staff is who's going to open in that drop box and getting it, or I can put it in the mail. But if I put it in the mail, it's going to get sent to Milwaukee, and then it's going to come back to Beloit, and then it's going to get given to my clerk staff. So chain of custody, I mean, I trust our postal service. They're federal employees. It would be a federal crime to tamper with it, but it's still, mistakes happen, and it's a lot more people that are touching my ballot between when it leaves my hand and when it gets to my clerk. And it takes time. And we know in 2020 there were postal service delays caused by staffing, caused by the pandemic. And so things that should have maybe taken a couple days were taking a lot longer. So I guess, can you just help me understand why you would rather I send my ballot to Milwaukee to come back to Beloit rather than driving downtown and putting it in a metal box that I know my clerk is going to check?
A couple things. One of them is the penalty, as the last one said, for doing something illegal in a federal mailbox is mail fraud.
So we made the penalties comparable. Would that address this?
I'm sorry?
If we made the penalties comparable, would address this?
Well, it would certainly make it more even. However, don't confuse anything we've said on this point with, we think you ought to vote on election day in person. Let me rephrase that. Greg thinks that. I don't know.
No,
Catherine,
that's how most of the world handles their elections.
including Ukraine.
I guess that does get at what I think is a deeper philosophical issue. I think Brett Murphy sort of got at this. I think people to have.
Are we going to go? Let's go to questions because there's still people waiting on the list today, and let's get to our questions and not have a philosophy conversation back and forth. Thank you.
I'll make that a question. There are people who cannot go in person on election day. They may not be able to very easily go in person at all, even to use those couple weeks of voting. Maybe it's because they're out of town. We certainly have plenty of.
So let's get to our questions.
I'm asking a question. Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe it's because they're out of town. We have snowbirds, but maybe it's because they have a disability. There was just an article earlier this week about people who are going to be unable to vote in this April 5th election because we have a judge who said that nobody else can help you turn a ballot. So can you just help me understand, if somebody can't get there in person and you also don't think anybody else should be able to help them return their ballot, how do we make sure that everyone's right to vote is still available to them and that they're actually able to exercise?
Well, certainly there are those instances where people are unavoidably in need of an absentee ballot. They're elderly. My dad's a great example. He votes by mail. I think the challenge that we face is when you pile on everything else, right? The inaccurate rolls and the lack of transparency around the process and the clear exploitation of certain of the processes. Then what would normally be like, maybe a few percentage points of your population needs to vote legitimately by mail, because you don't want to see anyone deprived. But that tips over into an indefinitely confined list, and it becomes the thing of the absurd. And so I think if we get to a place where we can have a common sense discussion about who really needs a mail ballot, then let's accomplish that, absolutely. But with all due respect, all of the other ways in which we're now extending this, it's voting in the park and voting in a car wash and voting at some point we have to say, when is it too far? And I think that's part of what we're discussing here today.
And so is that really about security, or is that about what Representative Murphy said, that we don't want to make voting fun, we don't want to make it a national holiday, we don't want to encourage it, we want to be so stoic that if you really feel like voting you can, but God forbid we encourage people to vote. Is that really what it's about?
It's a rhetorical. I'm not certain what's your question.
My question is, it seems like we've got people in this room, both on this committee and in the audience, who are not interested in encouraging people to vote, who want to go to that viewpoint that voting is more of a privilege or something that, the people who really are motivated can do, and not something that we should encourage society to participate in, even if that means, God forbid, that it's fun.
All right. I think we've gone a little but do you have another question for the information that was presented?
Last question on the information. You mentioned, and I think this was not in Wisconsin, but obviously we're trying to get a national picture here. You mentioned some convictions that was it San Luis? And I think you said there was a conviction that would be coming soon. Can you help me understand that? It seems to me either you're convicted or you're not. So, is that other conviction happened? And if so, or with the ones that have happened, do you have case numbers and things you can get to us after this hearing so that we can have some of that actual data in front of us?
Absolutely.
And that other conviction has happened as well?
They are negotiating settlement.
Okay. I think usually when plea deals are being negotiated, that's not public, but interesting that you would know that.
Representative Rosa, you have another question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you again for your time. I would like to go on record of encouraging everybody to vote on April the 5th. We have a spring election. I'm always disappointed at the voter turnout in that election. There are municipal races that get people out to vote, but I would like to stand firmly saying that I am a person that encourages people to vote and certainly would not want to disenfranchise any eligible voter to do so. I have a question about number 3 on your list about mass mailing of ballots, and I'd like you to help me to clarify some things. Do you agree that a lot of third-party organizations send out mailings encouraging people to vote by absentee if they cannot get to the polls on voting day?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. So because that happens, I had people in my district say, oh, I got 10 absentee ballots in the mail. And I said, did you save any of those ballots? I'd like to see ballots, because if that's true, we have a problem here. And then they, oh, I threw it in the garbage and I wish I had saved it. So we had a conversation about these organizations that send sample ballots out, and they are misinterpreted as being actual ballots. And I would think if you truly believe you were getting 10 absentee ballots from, a clerk, them, but, some people are not educated in understanding the process of others. So I would like you to help me explain to people that these third-party organizations send out notifications. They please vote by absentee ballot. Here's a sample ballot of what you, and they are not actual ballots. They are encouraging people to get an absentee ballot if they cannot be at the polls on election days. So would you agree with me that there is a misunderstanding in the general populace that these third-party encouragements to vote by absentee, they look like absentee ballots and they are misinterpreted that they're absentee ballots? Because Representative Spreitzer is right. We do not have a law that says you can mass mail ballots to people. So could you explain a little bit about your perspective on these mailings that people get that they think they're ballots, but they're not really ballots?
You're exactly right. Yes, and that happens all over the country. Groups send mass mail applications or requests for ballots, sample ballots, and it does get very, very confusing to the average voter who is assuming that whatever comes to them must be legitimate. And that adds to this problem, yes.
If I may just follow up on that question. To me, that exposes a horrible lack of knowledge about the voting process with the general populace. I wish we had better civics classes in our high schools. I wish that we had a better understanding of that whole process. And I think that one thing this whole discussion has led to is that we really have a pretty illiterate general populace on the process of voting. And I wish that were better. I'm hoping that what we're doing here helps to educate people, but that's a real limit in our general populace about the understanding of the process. Thank you.
Representative Subek, we have one more question.
I have a couple more questions. Thank you. So I went back to this issue of absentee voting, and Greg, you stated that you think people should have to vote on election day. Moments later, Catherine told us.
I'd like to stick to the information they have and not have
This was
debates.
something he said, and I'm going to ask a question about it.
I would like to talk about the information they have and not have their personal. I mean, let's get to questions.
They're here to share their views. If you find my question offensive and don't want to answer it, you don't have to, but I would appreciate the ability to at least ask it, Madam Chair.
All right.
So I can think, and then we got into a discussion about some of the reasons that people might absentee vote. I know many of the people sitting on this side of the table have probably absentee voted on days when we've been on the floor on election day, for example. So I guess my question is, who should be able to? Should Catherine's father be able to absentee vote? Should any of these people in the room, if they happen to be on vacation, or if Perhaps they get sick on election day. They want to make sure that they don't get stuck because of a snowstorm or because they can't leave their house on that day. Because I'm wondering if you believe a line needs to be drawn.
Well, I mean, certainly a line does need to be drawn, and I think that it's a difficult line because you have organizations, nonprofit organizations that are actively promoting. National Vote at Home is a great example of an organization that is actively promoting nationwide, stay at home, don't vote. And that doesn't matter whether or not you can, just vote from home. So that's a conversation certainly for your legislative body to have. I think to Representative Roser's comment about the awareness of the general populace around what are the ways in which you should vote and the processes around that and so forth. In most other countries around the world, they vote on election day, and there's a tremendous sense of pride in voting on election day. And so somewhere between voting on election day, which I would consider to be a gold standard, if everybody who is registered to vote, eligible and registered to vote, showed up and voted, we win as a country. That a united electorate is a united America. That's a great thing. And then we can argue about all the rest of it, but we're all having our voices heard. But then there's another extreme, right? There are enormous nonprofit organizations pushing to do away with that in person. And so somewhere in between there is for each state to decide, but it's an important conversation. And I don't know quite the answer, but there has to be a discussion about it that takes politics out of it and looks at what's practical.
I find it interesting to talk about organizations trying to get rid of election day. I have yet to see a national organization trying to get rid of voting in person or election day. There is a definite, in my mind, distinct difference between saying you should be able to vote in whatever way makes the most sense for you so that we can have that united electorate and everyone exercises their right to vote. I want to see everybody vote. And frankly, as long as it's free and fair and we have checks and balances in place, I don't care if that happens on election day or via absentee ballot, because you're casting your ballot with your vote, right?
Do you have a question, Representative?
Yes, I do. So I think that where we agree is, or at least where per se we agree is, gold standard, everybody voting. I want to make sure everybody has the options available to them that they need in order to be able to exercise that. What worries me about drawing that line is suddenly you cut some folks out who no longer have that opportunity, which is why I asked the question out, where do we draw the line? So I don't want to take a shot at answers, but if you were to draw the line, where would you draw the line? What would you suggest to us?
I'm just a contractor.
Sure. Okay. Fair enough. It was because you had talked about no absentee voting that I particularly asked about your thoughts on that after Catherine had spoken. But I think it's easy to say you should draw a line, but I don't hear who it is that we should cut out.
And if I may, I know you want to answer this too, but it's a balance, because there are countries right now that are voting on blockchain. They've mastered the technology. It's an easy, convenient process. Blockchain offers a national security and a state sovereignty and a personal liberty. It's a great balance. That's not where we are in this country. We still can't agree about a standard form of voter identification. Our roles are abysmal, and the processes around all of that, with what we discussed here today, that's what makes it complicated. So the closer we can get to technologies and awareness and public education, then the more options can be put on a table theoretically, because you have the checks and balances, as you referred to, there to support that. Because certainly you, and I think you would probably agree, you want to make sure that, yes, everybody who's registered and wants to vote has that opportunity to participate, but also that vote is not going to be canceled out by a vote that should not have been cast, by an illegal ballot, or by a loss of process. So it's a balance, and we didn't get here overnight, and it's not going to be fixed like that. This is a process that has happened over a long time, and now we need to begin to take a hard look at not just the ways in which we can vote, but the processes that underpin this to move this whole process forward so that I think everybody feels better about it.
And that's why she's the boss.
Fair enough, fair enough. I wish we could get to what you think that line would be, but I understand that you don't have an answer to that part of it. My other question for you relates to number 5, making the penalty for cheating something cheaters fair. Because right now the penalties for cheating are felony penalties. I don't know if they're adequate to invoke fear or not. I can tell you I would be afraid of that. There's other reasons that I wouldn't cheat in an election, but the penalties, if that alone were the reason, that would be enough to make me fearful. So I am wondering, again, what do you think the penalties should be? What is it lacking? What level do they need to reach to invoke that level of fear that you think is needed? Again, recognizing that there are any felony penalties attached to cheating.
Yeah, I really think that's a matter for this body and others. Mr. Bob may have some other opinions about that, but it's not our job and it's not what we do. But we certainly hoping that debate will happen, that there is some strength.
Sure. So just to be clear then, your hypothesis is that people don't fear the penalties, but you're not sure what level it would need to go to for them to for that. Is that?
No, I just said that it's not our call.
It's a recommendation up there that we should penalty something they fear, which I think the implication is that it's not. And
Right.
I agree. I don't want people, I believe that there should be serious penalties. I believe there are serious penalties,
Right.
but if they're not serious enough, I'd be curious to know what you think they should be.
Well, it's among other things, there should be more significant federal penalties in federal elections, and the federal law is completely unclear as it relates to harvesting, trafficking, and what actually makes sense and what works. So, I do believe there are federal penalties in federal elections that should prevail, but the rest of it is, in my view, is a state-based.
All right, thank you.
All right, but I'm gonna just jump in here real quick before I want to talk real quick. The video that you were unable to retrieve, the video that you showed the slide on, basically said the video was unable to get the video from basically a lot of the Milwaukee locations, correct? To get any of the video from the Green Bay or Kenosha, I'm sorry. Racine, were you able to get it from those groups?
We have not received video from them. No, but in fairness, that's still kind of fresh. We've expanded our project, and we're not hopeful, but well, we are hopeful. But based upon what we saw in Milwaukee, we'll see.
Okay, so this is the problem with guidance for the state of Wisconsin, right? Guidance was given. There is to be available video information, and we don't have it. So I'm concerned about free and fair elections in the state of Wisconsin, and I can't get any of the video information. And I think that this is a problem with guidance coming from the Wisconsin Election Commission, because there is no penalty, there's no enforcement, and this is what frustrates so many. So I appreciate it. I would be very grateful if you would let us know if the other two communities do step forward with video, which we have seen from other states, right? Of people taking pictures of multiple ballots, taking photos. We're assuming that the multiple photos was paid. And I know it's hard for people to believe that people could get paid for moving these ballots to the state of Wisconsin. But the information that you provided today makes us question how ballot boxes created transparency to elections, not only in 2020, but going forward. And I appreciate having the conversations, the pros and the cons, about the ease of voting, which Wisconsin is a very easy state to vote. You can show up on election day for states. So I would hope that the municipalities now see this would push more about voting on election day, and knowing that there will always be, those that are out of town. As a matter of fact, we have 39 states that have no excuse early voting, no excuse. You have 8 states that have all mail-in, and there's 16 that have specific requirements about being out of the country or illness, and certainly military and overseas. We understand that as well. So I look forward to having that debate, but please let us know. I think having the video on these boxes was supposed to give us confidence, and it was put out as guidance, and it didn't happen. Representative Rose. Yeah, Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I had a question for Ledge Council.
Sure.
So we're talking about the videos and the fact that we don't have most of them. Is there any law regulation around how long that video needs to be?
Thank you. The retention requirements for election materials talk about ballots, applications for absentee ballots, registration forms, or other records and papers requisite to voting in any federal election. And those things need to be kept for 22 months. So the question of wordings is not directly addressed.
Okay, so that's a murky question.
So we provided guidance, but we did provide a timetable for keeping that.
Sure. Another question for Ledge Council, real quick. Events for voting outside of
not only the Supreme Court has said when you unjustly cannot vote, but it is also equally violated when someone votes illegally and cancels your vote. So there has been historically a bipartisan consensus that we balance ease of access to voting with the increased potential for fraud and try to achieve a balance that means that everybody's right to vote is protected. Now, these corrupt practices in Wisconsin have been through the Government Accountability Board, by John Doe investigations, by the current Wisconsin Election Commission, and now by the Zuckerberg Five, which is the subject of this hearing. In the past, the Wisconsin legislature has made significant reforms in the administration of campaign finance election boards by abolishing GAB, by prohibiting John Doe investigations, by revising your campaign finance laws. And I applaud you for what you are doing to try to reform your own laws in the face of evidence of serious irregularities in its administration in prior elections. But this testimony of mine, and I think all of ours, is not about relitigating the 2020 election, overturning the 2020 election. That is done and over. The only way to remove President Biden is by his death, resignation, impeachment, or disability under the 25th Amendment. And what this is about is the future, is what happened in the past, what reforms are necessary in the future. Now, a little background leading up to the 2020 election. There was a concerted effort by Democrat and progressive organizations to upset the balance between ease of access to voting and preventing a voter fraud that had been achieved on a bipartisan basis. And that was bringing about 425 lawsuits before the 2020 election, which had three principal goals. One, ensuring that people that are ineligible to vote are maintained on the record. In other words, fighting any effort by any state to clean up their voter rolls. Secondly, is to expand voting into their nirvana, which would be mailed to every single registered voter, whether they are on the active or inactive roll, in order to allow them to vote. Now, historically, everyone has agreed that the most secure and fraud-free voting is in person, because all the protections that ensure that it's the actual voter, that the voter's real, not dead, and all these different things are applicable there. Everyone has agreed that the least secure and therefore more apt for exploitation for fraud is when you mail a ballot to everybody in the state. And if there, as you move down that spectrum, and increase mail-in balloting, your opportunities for fraud increase. And everyone has always agreed to that, because it is a balance that you want to achieve, because when an illegal voter votes, that means that a legitimate voter's vote is canceled. And that is a denial of the right to vote. Now, the Zuckerberg Five, and specifically here in Wisconsin, the final piece of the 425 lawsuits brought by Democrats and progressives was to tear down every other remaining anti-fraud protection that attended mail-in balloting. So they brought suits to, for instance, prohibit matches between the application and the ballot that is mailed in, to strike down witness requirement that exists in some states. Multiple lawsuits attacking anything that would ameliorate the possibility of fraud for mail-in balloting. And obviously, this was successful in many respects in many states, and that this concerted effort make our whole system way more susceptible to fraud and abuse has created suspicion and concern. And you know, it's not just that you can prove someone voted illegally. It is also the public perception, the public assurance in the integrity of election. And that is why many of these protections against fraud have been adopted. Now here, the Zuckerberg Five were the five, and they described themselves as this. The Zuckerberg Five were the five largest and Democrat-controlled cities in the state of Wisconsin, and it was there that, as a result of the funding by Mark Zuckerberg of approximately $10 million throughout the state, 8.5 million in these five county cities, in which corrupt and illegal activity administration of election laws for partisan ends occurred by your Wisconsin state government here, municipality. Now, this scheme involved a billionaire, Mark Zuckerberg, who gamed the system using tax-exempt and undisclosed money to enlist and provide the funds for certain local governments to engage in partisan and often illegal election activities, targeting preferred groups and preferred neighborhoods which was designed, the targeting was designed to turn out the maximum number of Democrat voters. Now, this scheme had two essential features. The first, and much of this is from the Office of Special Counsel's very excellent investigation, is one, overtly partisan. The five major Democrat-controlled cities received 85% of the money, and even within those cities, preferred neighborhoods and groups were targeted, which all of which met the profile of the classic and most hardcore Democrat voters in the state, and by a billionaire with a overt political agenda. Two, the scheme had two key elements. Number one, which was to embed a partisan get out the vote effort within local governments. Now, and you know, get out the vote activity is done by candidates, political parties, even to a limited extent under IRS restrictions, not-for-profit organizations. But embedding a partisan GOT effort within the government administration of an election has four big advantages. Number one, it disguises the partisan nature of the activity. Oh, it's the city. They're nonpartisan, right? They're just doing, this is just good government activity, right? Number two, it disguises the donors and therefore violates transparency. Because when you contribute to the groups that do this historically, usually candidates and political parties, but occasionally not, those two, certainly under campaign finance laws, have to report their donors. And so there is the transparency that Wisconsin prides itself on. Third is that it evades contribution limits under federal and state law, because both federal and state law limits what you can give to political parties, and to a few $1,000s. Here we have tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars nationally that is used to on a partisan basis to influence the election. And number four is that by embedding the GOTV activity in a local administration of an election, that gives that get out the vote activity real-time and cost-free access to the voter rolls. So hour by hour in deciding who to send your people out to get them to get their absentee ballot, or to get them to registered, or get them to early vote, or get them to vote in person. Who is voting. You get that information cost-free, and it greatly facilitates that activity where everyone else has to pay enormous sums and often doesn't get the the information till days later. Now, this scheme gave a significant partisan political advantage to those that it was designed to benefit, the Democratic states in Wisconsin. Now, the second key element is illegal drop boxes. And I don't need a court to tell me that they were illegal in Wisconsin. I can read Wisconsin statutes, and they say delivery, to a clerk in person. So it is not, or for an absentee ballot, or placing in the mail. So, these drop boxes, funded by Zuckerberg, created the critical infrastructure for the ballot harvesting that followed. And secondly, so did the advice from the Wisconsin Election Commission. So despite clear, unequivocal state law in Wisconsin that in order to deliver it to a clerk, there had to be clerks there, the WIC said that they could be unstaffed and furthermore anywhere, which is also a violation of a separate statute. So these illegal drop boxes were then predictably and apparently, as True the Vote has revealed, throughout the United States, these were ruthlessly exploited by a large-scale, organized, and illegal ballot harvesting operation involving not-for-profits and people working with them. So this scheme, based on the figures, could very well have influenced the outcome of the 2020 election and cry out for reform. However, it does not provide the legal basis, for actually doing anything about the 2020 election. That election under federal law is done, complete, and unreversible, except in the ways that I have described, and that we should focus not on that, but on the necessary reforms that will prevent this from happening again. Thank you for allowing me to tell, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Representative Kessler, I think you had a question right away.
There it goes. Yeah, I did. So, and this kind of is continuing kind of one of your last thoughts that you just provided, that there isn't a route for decertification. Can you, so tell me why? I guess, we've heard that from like council, but there's other folks that have an opinion. Otherwise, I guess what I'd like to know is why is there a route for decertification? And then I guess the second part of it is when you see arguments for decertification, are those legitimate legal arguments that could be made, or do you think that those are just non-existent or not practical?
Well, the best thing I can do is give you my best opinion. All right, and I have had reason on 3 separate occasions to study this issue, including as a member of the Uniform Law Commission when we came up with a model law to ensure that electors vote faithfully when they vote in the Electoral College, and you have such a law here in Wisconsin, and 2 other occasions. First, the Wisconsin legislature does have plenary power, and I'm a big fan of this, plenary power to determine the manner of how your electors are elected or selected, right? And you've exercised that power. You said the voters, okay? You said when the voters vote for Joe Biden, they are actually voting for the list of electors and alternate electors that his party nominated in Wisconsin. And then they proceed to, for that election to be subject possibly to a recount or a contest, but also a process of certification, where you have a law that says, the governor is to certify this, and the federal and also federal law allows a recertification up until January 6th. So during that period of time, that's really where the difference is. everything I've said so far, I think everybody agrees to. The difference is timing. Okay, you had authority in late November. All right, if you felt that the election was so corrupt and the results needed to be, you needed to intervene. You could have intervened. You had the power in the Constitution, and that would have been respected and certified your own electors. Okay, the ones that you think were lawfully done. However, once you've exercised your power, as you did, on the manner of the election, well, federal law and the 12th Amendment kicks in on what happens after your certification. Okay? In other words, when the Electoral College meets, in fact, when your certification is conclusive, even under federal law, and then ultimately January 6th, when the president under federal law is conclusively determined, right? It's over then. You can't go back. There is no mechanism, no provision, no anything that would have any practical legal effect. Let me add one other thing. You know, electors are elected every 4 years. Well, when they're done, right? When they vote, and their votes are counted in this time, January 6th, by Congress, they're done. In other words, they're out of office. There's no electors right now for you to decertify because there are no electors in office. You elect new ones, okay, in 2024. So, you know, so we differ on this issue, and I know, and I share much of the frustration that many have about what has now been disclosed, okay, and in my view, proven that there was substantial irregularities in the 2020 election, that a court could reach the conclusion in a recount or contest back in November, okay, or December perhaps, that there was the results could not be determined, and people are frustrated about that and hurt by that, and the respect for our elections has plummeted because of that in many places, but it serves zero legal purpose, and in my opinion, useful purpose, to be talking about doing something like decertification that is pointless. What we need to be concentrating on is making the reforms that are necessary to correct the situation, and that will have an effect. And you are obviously already on the road. There's still other things you might consider.
Thank you.
Any further questions? I think with that, I appreciate everybody's patience today. I know this went a little longer than we anticipated. And with that, we're going to call the hearing to an end. Thank you.
This program is a production of Wisconsin Eye, an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit media network with a mission to inform, educate, and engage